In this episode, we move from the broad idea of lawful and trustworthy artificial intelligence, AI, into four governance requirements that make those ideas real in day-to-day practice: human oversight, transparency, notification, and quality management. For a brand new learner, these can sound like legal labels that belong in policy binders rather than in actual systems, but that is not how modern AI governance works. Under the European Union, EU, Artificial Intelligence Act, AI Act, these requirements are connected to how a system is designed, how people use it, what information is shared with users and deployers, and whether an organization can prove it is managing the system in a disciplined way. The important beginner lesson is that the law is not satisfied just because a person is somewhere in the process or because a notice exists on a website. The law is trying to make sure people can understand what the system is doing, intervene when needed, and make informed decisions when they are exposed to AI or affected by it. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Human oversight is often misunderstood because many people assume it simply means a human being is present at some point in the workflow. The requirement is more demanding than that, especially for high-risk systems. The AI Act says high-risk AI systems must be designed and developed so they can be effectively overseen by natural persons while they are being used, and that oversight must aim to prevent or minimize risks to health, safety, and fundamental rights. It also says the oversight measures must fit the risk, the level of autonomy, and the context of use, which means the law does not expect the exact same control pattern for every system. A highly consequential screening system used in employment, education, or access to services calls for more serious oversight than a low-stakes convenience feature. That means governance begins with understanding how much power the system has, how much harm a bad output could cause, and how realistic it is for a human to detect and correct trouble before the trouble becomes a real-world injury. The law also makes a useful distinction between oversight that is built into the system and oversight that is implemented by the deployer. Providers can build safeguards into the system itself through interface choices, alerts, thresholds, review steps, safe interrupt mechanisms, and design features that make outputs easier to interpret. Providers can also identify measures that are appropriate for the deployer to put in place, such as staffing rules, approval steps, or escalation procedures in the operating environment. What matters is not just that a human can technically see the output, but that the person assigned to oversight can understand the system's capacities and limits, monitor for anomalies or unexpected performance, interpret outputs correctly, disregard or reverse an output when needed, and intervene in operation if the system begins moving toward an unsafe state. That is why a human reviewer who lacks context, authority, or time is not meaningful oversight. Governance requires an oversight arrangement that works in the real world, not just on paper. A particularly important concept here is automation bias, which means people may place too much trust in what a system produces simply because it looks technical, efficient, or data-driven. The AI Act explicitly warns about the tendency to automatically rely or over-rely on high-risk AI outputs, especially when the system is used to provide information or recommendations that shape human decisions. That matters because a human can appear to be in control while actually acting as a rubber stamp. A teacher reviewing a student risk flag, a hiring manager looking at an applicant score, or a clinician seeing a prioritization signal may feel they are still making the final decision. Yet the system may quietly frame the range of options they take seriously. Real oversight, therefore, requires enough understanding, confidence, and organizational permission to question the system. It also requires training and support, because a person who cannot recognize weak evidence, drift, or unexpected behavior will often approve bad outputs without realizing it. The deployer side of the equation is just as important as the provider side. The law says deployers of high-risk AI systems must assign human oversight to natural persons who have the necessary competence, training, authority, and support. They must take appropriate technical and organizational measures to use the system according to the instructions that accompany it, monitor the operation of the system, and act when they have reason to think the use of the system may create risk. In serious cases, deployers are expected to inform the provider and relevant market surveillance authority and suspend use. This means oversight is not only a design feature, but also an operational responsibility. An organization cannot simply buy a system, switch it on, and assume the provider has handled every risk. Once the system is being used in a real setting, the deployer has ongoing duties around supervision, competence, monitoring, and response, which is a core exam theme because it separates legal theory from operational accountability. A simple example helps make the difference between weak and strong oversight easier to hear. Imagine a school system using a high-risk AI tool to help prioritize students for additional intervention. Weak oversight would mean a staff member receives the output, trusts the score because it looks objective, and moves students into categories without understanding how the tool performs, what data it depends on, or which cases may require caution. Stronger oversight would mean the staff member knows the intended purpose of the system, understands situations where the output may be unreliable, can identify unusual patterns, can seek a second review, and can disregard the system when the context shows the recommendation is not appropriate. The human is not there to decorate the process. The human is there to exercise judgment in a way that reduces harm. That is the deeper governance lesson. Oversight is only meaningful when people can actually understand, challenge, and interrupt system-driven momentum. Transparency is the companion requirement that makes good oversight possible. If the system is opaque to the people expected to supervise it, the oversight duty becomes little more than a performance. Under the AI Act, high-risk AI systems must be designed and developed so their operation is sufficiently transparent to enable deployers to interpret the system's output and use it appropriately. They must also be accompanied by clear instructions that are concise, complete, correct, relevant, accessible, and comprehensible. Those instructions are not supposed to be marketing language. They are supposed to tell deployers what the system is meant to do, what level of accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity was tested, what foreseeable circumstances may affect those expectations, what risks are known, how outputs may be interpreted, what input specifications matter, what human oversight measures are needed, and what maintenance, update, hardware, or logging considerations matter for proper use. Transparency, in this sense, is practical clarity for responsible use. That kind of transparency is not the same as public disclosure, and beginners benefit from keeping those two ideas separate. One form of transparency is aimed at deployers so they can interpret outputs and use systems appropriately. Another form is aimed at people who interact with AI or are exposed to AI-generated or AI-manipulated content. Article 50 of the AI Act addresses this second category and creates notification-style duties in several common situations. Providers of systems intended to interact directly with people must inform them they are interacting with an AI system unless that is already obvious from context. Providers of systems generating synthetic audio, image, video, or text content must ensure the outputs are marked in a machine-readable and detectable way as artificially generated or manipulated. Deployers of emotion recognition or biometric categorization systems must inform the natural persons exposed to those systems that the systems are operating. These are not cosmetic formalities. They are meant to reduce deception, impersonation, fraud, misinformation, and manipulation. The notification duties continue when deepfakes or public interest text are involved. Deployers using a system that generates or manipulates image, audio, or video content constituting a deepfake must disclose that the content has been artificially generated or manipulated. Deployers using AI to generate or manipulate text intended to inform the public on matters of public interest must also disclose the artificial origin of that text, although there is an important exception when the content has undergone human review or editorial control and a natural or legal person holds editorial responsibility. The law also says the required information must be presented clearly, in a distinguishable manner, and in an accessible form, at the latest at the first interaction or exposure. That last point is important because hidden notices buried in a policy page do not achieve the purpose of meaningful notice. The governance goal is to give people information at the moment they need it so they can make a better judgment about what they are seeing or experiencing. It is also worth understanding what notification does not do. Informing someone that they are interacting with AI does not automatically make the interaction fair, safe, or lawful. Disclosing that content is machine-generated does not solve problems of bias, fraud, emotional manipulation, or poor system design. Notifying workers that a high-risk AI system will be used in the workplace does not erase other obligations around labor law, privacy, and governance. The AI Act itself says these transparency duties do not replace other transparency duties under union or national law, and the deployer obligations connect with other legal requirements, such as data protection impact assessments, where applicable. In other words, notice is necessary in certain contexts, but it is not magic. It supports informed judgment and accountability, yet it must sit alongside meaningful oversight, sound controls, and a defensible use case if the organization wants the overall governance approach to hold together. This brings us to quality management, which is the least glamorous of the four topics, but often the one that determines whether the other three are real or superficial. A quality management system, QMS, for high-risk AI is not just a folder of procedures written to satisfy a regulator. Under the AI Act, providers of high-risk AI systems must put a QM in place that ensures compliance with the regulation, and that system must be documented in a systematic and orderly way through written policies, procedures, and instructions. That sounds administrative, but the deeper idea is operational discipline. The law is asking whether the organization has a repeatable way to govern design, development, testing, changes, data handling, risk controls, post-market monitoring, and accountability. Without that operating backbone, human oversight becomes inconsistent, transparency becomes incomplete, and notification duties become easy to miss because nobody owns the decisions that keep those requirements alive throughout the life of the system. The list of what the QMS must include shows how broad that operating backbone really is. The system must address regulatory compliance strategy, including conformity assessment procedures and management of modifications to the high-risk system. It must include techniques and procedures for design control, design verification, development, quality control, and quality assurance. It must also include examination, test, and validation procedures carried out before, during, and after development, along with the frequency for those activities. The QMS has to cover technical specifications and standards or other means of ensuring compliance when standards do not fully cover the requirements. It also must include systems and procedures for data management across acquisition, collection, analysis, labeling, storage, filtration, mining, aggregation, retention, and related operations performed before placing the system on the market or putting it into service. This is why quality management in AI governance reaches far beyond traditional product quality alone. The QMS also extends into what happens after launch, which is one reason it is so important for governance rather than mere paperwork. The law requires the QMS to include the risk management system, the setup and maintenance of post-market monitoring, procedures for serious incident reporting, handling of communication with authorities and other relevant parties, systems for record-keeping of relevant documentation and information, resource management, and an accountability framework that sets out management and staff responsibilities. The Act also says implementation should be proportionate to the size of the provider's organization, but that flexibility does not remove the need for rigor. Smaller organizations may do this with simpler structures, yet they still must achieve the level of protection needed for compliance. The law even allows providers already subject to sectoral quality management duties under other union laws to integrate these AI elements into existing systems, which reinforces the idea that AI governance should be embedded into how the organization already manages serious obligations. When you connect all four requirements together, the governance picture becomes much clearer. Human oversight tells you that a meaningful human role must exist and be designed for the actual level of risk. Transparency tells you that the people responsible for using or supervising the system must receive enough information to interpret outputs and operate the system appropriately. Notification tells you that affected people or exposed audiences must be informed in certain situations, so AI is not silently masquerading as something else. Quality management tells you that none of this should depend on memory, improvisation, or good intentions. Instead, there should be assigned responsibilities, written procedures, training, review, escalation, and lifecycle controls that keep the organization aligned from design through deployment and ongoing use. Governance becomes weak when these pieces are treated as separate checkboxes. It becomes strong when they are treated as one connected operating model. Several exam traps sit inside this topic. One is believing that human oversight always means a person approves the final decision, when in reality the law is more interested in whether the human can understand the system, detect trouble, resist automation bias, and intervene effectively. Another is thinking transparency means perfect explainability in all cases, when the practical governance question is whether deployers can interpret outputs and use the system appropriately with clear information about purpose, performance, limits, and risks. A third trap is treating notice as a one-time label rather than a meaningful disclosure given clearly, accessibly, and at the right moment. A fourth is assuming quality management is only for large enterprises with huge compliance departments, even though the law says implementation may be proportionate to size, while still requiring real rigor. The safest beginner mindset is to ask whether the requirement changes how the system is actually designed, used, and governed. If the answer is no, then the requirement probably has not been operationalized well enough. By the end of this episode, the most important idea to keep in mind is that governance requirements are meant to shape behavior, not just documentation. The law expects humans to be able to supervise high-risk AI in a way that is real, informed, and capable of stopping harm. It expects transparency that helps deployers use systems responsibly and notifications that help people recognize when they are dealing with AI or AI-shaped content. It expects a QMS that holds the whole arrangement together through policies, procedures, testing, change control, monitoring, accountability, and communication. If you remember those relationships, the topic becomes much easier to understand and much easier to apply on the exam. Human oversight, transparency, notification, and quality management are not four unrelated obligations. They are four ways of asking whether an organization can govern AI with clarity, control, and evidence instead of hope.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.